Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Lauren.
I am Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Paradise After Dark is an independent podcast covering true crime,
Unsolved mysteries,
missing people,
urban legends,
and strange places. If you'd like to support our show and get early and ad-free episodes, plus extra Paradise After Dark content, please sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media.
And be sure to check out our website at paradiseafterdark.com.
On the website, you'll find links to all of our episodes, even the archived episodes, our mailing list, merch store, links to our social media, and of course our Patreon.
On our website, we also have a little virtual tip jar, which we've mentioned before. If you want to swing by there and help out the show, you can drop a couple coins in that jar and we'll give you a shout out.
And also on the website, which I just added today, is a button to buy tickets to our 5-year podiversary party.
It's a podiversary party.
5 years of Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
That is going to be happening on March 26th in Fort Myers, Florida at Mission Barbecue.
And their mission is barbecue.
It is.
And our mission is to go eat that barbecue.
Yes. So if you are local to Southwest Florida, Mission Barbecue is located at 12984 South Cleveland Avenue in Fort Myers. 4 to 8 p.m. We'll be there. We will have a buffet for anyone who wants to come and mow down and celebrate with us 5 years of Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
I think we have one more announcement.
One more announcement.
Yes. Starting next month, in March of this year, we are actually going back to our bi-weekly schedule. Last year in 2022, we were doing weekly, and we've been doing weekly for over a year now. But after discussing it with some of our listeners and discussing it amongst each other,
we did an official poll.
We did do an official poll. Our listeners prefer every other week having a longer, more detailed episode rather than shorter, less detailed episodes on a weekly basis.
I think that's the best way to do it. I think to serve these cases correctly, I think some of them really need us to go all through, get all the details, and put it all out there for our listeners.
Right. And that's just hard. It's hard for us to do in a week's time frame. So we're going back to bi-weekly. Hope nobody's upset by that. If you get on our Patreon, you'll get extra content if you miss us that much.
Yeah, I don't even know how many OTUCs we have.
Yes,
off-topic uncut.
Off-topic uncuts, yeah.
We have a bunch.
We do.
We have a bunch on there. So there's a bunch of stuff if you just like listen to us talk about this, that, the other, and absolutely nothing sometimes.
Okay, so we're going to get into tonight's episode, and we don't normally do this, but I feel the need for a little trigger warning that this is a case about the murder of children. So if that is something you are sensitive to and don't want to hear about, please feel free to just sit this one out. Filicide is the deliberate act of a parent killing their own child. The word filicide is derived from the Latin words filius and filia, which means son and daughter, and the suffix "side" means to kill, murder, or cause death. It's an unimaginable act for most of us, especially parents, because everything in our nature, down to our primal instinct, especially for mothers, is to protect our children. I mean, you've heard of mama bear syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
But what happens when the opposite happens? What happens when mothers or fathers are driven to kill their own children? It's almost unthinkable.
Well, we are going to get into this story and try our best to understand what was going on with Lindsay Clancy, a 32-year-old labor and delivery nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital, when she killed her 3 children and attempted to kill herself on Tuesday, January 24th of 2023. If most parents, especially mothers, would do anything to protect their kids and could never fathom deliberately hurting them, why are there those who direct their most intense violence against their own children? This is a question that's been raised before in the high-profile cases of Susan Smith and Andrea Yates, whom both drowned their children in two entirely different ways.
Dr. Philip Resnick published research on filicide in 1969 and stated there were 5 main motives for filicide, including altruistic, fatal maltreatment, unwanted child, and spousal revenge. In altruistic filicide, a parent kills their child because they don't want to leave the child in what they perceive as a cruel world. This type of murder is often accompanied with a suicide attempt. In a second type of altruistic filicide, a child is killed to end his or her real or imagined suffering. Basically, the parent believes that their death is in the child's best interest. This is the common theme in cases like Andrea Yates, who drowned her 5 children in the bathtub on June 20th of 2001 in Texas, and Jennifer Hart and her wife, Sarah Hart, who murdered their 6 adopted children when Jennifer intentionally drove the family's SUV off a cliff on March 26, 2018 in California.
Fatal maltreatment, which is death as a result of physical abuse, even though homicide is not always the goal. An example of this is Gabriel Fernandez. This is the poor young boy who was murdered by his mother and stepfather, and the subject of the popular Netflix documentary, The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez. A subcategory of fatal maltreatment is Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Now, this is a very rare syndrome in which parents hurt their children in an attempt to get more attention for themselves. And in this case, a lot of times it usually starts with just regular abuse.
Yes.
Prior to something severe happening.
That's the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case.
Yes.
That
exactly.
was the
That's a great
Munchausen syndrome by proxy. So the unwanted child motive is exactly that. And sadly, most of the world believes this is why Kaylee Anthony died. And this was definitely the case when Susan Smith drowned her 2 children because the man she was dating didn't want kids. Spousal revenge killings are killings of children done to indirectly harm a domestic partner. This is also sometimes referred to as the Medea complex. The term is derived from Greek mythology, in which Medea killed her children, followed by Jason after he deserted her for a younger woman. Elaine Campion, an Ontario woman, murdered her 2 children on October 2, 2006. Canadian prosecutors argued that she wanted revenge on her ex-husband and feared he would receive custody. Campion committed the crime, the Crown insisted, out of hatred for her abusive ex-husband, whom she wanted to see suffer. They pointed to a videotape Campion appeared to have made within minutes of the murders. "There, are you happy?" Campion asks in the tape, presumably made for her ex. "God's taking care of them now." She was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of her 2 young girls. The jury agreed with the Crown's assertion that although she did suffer from mental illness, delusions that people were trying to steal her daughters, and that she saw aliens, she also knew what she was doing at the time of the killings, and that she had drowned the girls in the family bathtub to prevent her ex-husband from being granted custody.
I would assume that this has to be a very fearful, event happening with somebody. So they're in such fear that their children are going to be gone from them that they go to these extremes. That's the whole point of all of that, is there's so many things that you cannot understand that go on in the mind of a person. Even if you try to analyze it, overanalyze, research, it's just almost impossible to understand what is going through their mind at the time.
Right.
Well, on the evening of Tuesday, January 24th of 2023, that's literally just recently.
Yes. It's less than a month ago as of this recording.
Exactly. Now, the Clancy family was home when Patrick Clancy, this is Lindsay's husband, and the father of Cora, who was 5, Dawson, who was 3, and 8-month-old Callan, he popped out to pick up takeout food for dinner. He was gone less than 30 minutes, but returned home to his absolute worst nightmare. Now, while exactly what happened in those moments that Patrick was gone are still unclear, we do know that around 6 p.m., officers from Plymouth Police Department were called to the Duxbury home. Now, upon their arrival, the officers discovered 3 children in the home who were unconscious with obvious signs of trauma. Now, the 3 children were rushed to the local hospital where Cora and Dawson were pronounced dead upon arrival. An 8-month-old infant, Callan Clancy, would die 3 days later on Friday, January 27th at 11:18 a.m. at Boston Children's Hospital. Now, Lindsay was initially taken to Mass General after she threw herself out of a second-story window in an attempt to take her own life.
Lindsay Clancy is currently facing 2 counts of murder, 3 counts of strangulation, and 3 counts of assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. These charges may be changed to reflect the murder of her youngest child, 8-month-old Callan. On Friday, February 3rd, a funeral was held for the 3 children, while Lindsay Clancy remained hospitalized for her injuries she suffered when she jumped from the window of their home.
Now, attorney Kevin J. Reddington, who is representing Lindsay Clancy, said in court on February 3rd, the same day as her children's funeral, that his client was over-medicated at the time of the incident. Now, he also argued for permission to have a psychologist conduct an evaluation in her hospital room, a request in which the judge did grant. Now, it was reported by Boston Globe that she will be examined for evidence of postpartum mood disorder and potential mental health impacts after her lawyer contended that Lindsay was subject to a horrific overmedication of prescription drugs. Now, Lindsay will be examined by Paul D. Zeisel, a forensic psychologist. We've got a person who suffered grievously as a result of what possibly could be postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, Reddington said. He said Clancy was prescribed 13 different medications within a 4-month period that are used to treat mood disorders, anxiety, and psychosis. And I guess he's right. I suppose with 13 different medications, that would be considered a horrific overmedication.
I don't know that she was taking all 13 medications at the same time.
No, but you know how those medications can be. I've read about it where you have to wean off of this. You can't add that.
Right.
And when you start messing with the body's chemistry like that, I suppose you could have some issues. I've never had to take that medication, so I don't understand enough of it. But it would seem to me that if you had to take 13 different medications in a 4-month period, unless they were doing like trial and error, take this a little bit, see what happens, then take this and see what happens. We don't know at this point.
Well, and it just sort of, and I'm going way off script here, but it just sort of highlights the healthcare in our country where just throw a pill at it, throw a pill at it, throw a pill at it.
Exactly. Well, that was what her lawyer is kind of pushing here.
Reddington, a veteran lawyer who handled several high-profile cases, including homicides in which mental illness was at issue, has signaled he will present a rigorous defense that Clancy should not be held criminally responsible for the deaths of her children. During an interview Reddington gave on Thursday, February 2nd to the Boston Globe, he said that Lindsay Clancy and her husband Patrick, quote, went to the doctors repeatedly saying, please help us. This was turning her into a zombie. The medications that were prescribed were over the top, absolutely over the top, Reddington said. 1 week before the killings, Patrick Clancy approached a doctor treating his wife and asked for help managing her medications, Reddington said. Lindsay Clancy did not misuse her prescribed medications, he added. He said she intends to ask her doctors to speak with him about her care. She had medical care and treatment on a regular basis, and her husband was very proactive in trying to protect her and help her with the doctor's medications she was prescribed. They went through hell, and they didn't come back, he said.
Well, Clancy appeared via video conference to her arraignment on Tuesday, February 7th. Now, she lay in the hospital bed with multiple bandages and what currently appears to be some sort of paralysis, so she's unable to attend the courtroom. As we mentioned, what was presented by her attorney, it is no surprise that she pled not guilty to all charges. But a lot was revealed during this hearing. Now, prosecutors claimed Clancy killed her children with deliberate premeditation and extreme atrocity and cruelty. Now, while her attorney continues to claim that Lindsay was suffering from postpartum psychosis and was overmedicated, now this was what was leading her to commit these horrific acts. Now, the prosecution asserted that it believes that not only was Clancy of sound mind when she strangled her children, but that she also made plans to do so. Now, prosecutors claim that she was lucid at the time of the murders and that one of the first things she asked once she was capable of communicating was, "Do I need an attorney?" Which she wrote this down on a dry board that was given to her. Now, she was unable to speak. Something was wrong. She wasn't able to speak, so they gave her a dry board to write this down.
I believe she, along with jumping out of the windows, she cut her wrists and her neck.
That's right. You're right. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
That would make sense at this point.
Right.
It would definitely make it hard to speak. Reddington, as we mentioned, her attorney, said she told a psychologist that she heard a male voice telling her to kill her children prior to the attempted murder-suicide. This was also mentioned by her husband, Patrick. He said he received a call from Lindsay from her attorney's cell phone. And during this call, Patrick says that this was the first time that he had ever heard Lindsay say or mention anything regarding psychosis. And when he asked why she did what she did, she told him that a voice told her to do it.
Wow. Let's take a break. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
And we are back. So we have a timeline of the events leading up to the day of this tragedy. As per the Boston Herald, in September of 2022, Lindsay started to become anxious about returning to work after her maternity leave. She began to see psychiatrists and was prescribed medicines including the antidepressant Zoloft, Trazodone, and Prozac, the anti-anxiety targeting benzodiazepine drugs Valium, Ativan, and Klonopin, and Seroquel, an antipsychotic used to treat schizophrenia, major depression, and bipolar disorder. Patrick said she would take up to 4 pills a day.
Yeah, he also mentioned that she was very good with her medication, so she followed all the directions of the doctors. He claimed that if the doctor said, get off of this, take that, that's what she did. She would get rid of this medication, take this. So she was only taking about 3 to 4 pills a day from what they said, and she was really good about it. Now, on October 25th, 2022, Lindsay writes a note on her phone. "I think I sort of resent my other children because they prevent me from treating Cal like my first baby. And I know that's not fair to them. I know it rubs off on them, so we had a pretty rough evening. I want to feel love and connection with all of my kids."
On December 20th, 2022, Lindsay was evaluated at the Women and Infants Hospital Center for Women's Behavioral Health in Providence, where she was told that she did not have postpartum depression.
Now, in the first week of January, after telling Patrick that she had suicidal thoughts, Lindsay self-admitted herself to McLean Hospital. This is a psychiatric hospital in Belmont.
Yeah, she was there from January 1st to the 5th.
Yeah.
And the circumstances of her release on January 5th are not clear at this time. January 22nd, Patrick and Lindsay go to a family friend's house for dinner. The friend, who hadn't seen Lindsay in months, noted that he didn't expect her to be there due to her depression, but that she seemed fairly normal, if quiet. Now, the same weekend, members of Lindsay's family came to visit. So it looks like a lot of people in her life, including extended friend groups, family, knew something was going on, knew she had some sort of postpartum depression, which is extremely common. And like this family friend wasn't even expecting her to show up, but she did, and she seemed normal.
Well, it was obviously something that she spoke about, she talked to people about, so she included her immediate friends and family in her issues.
And she was doing, it seems to me like she was doing the right thing. She was seeking help from the doctors, from the psychiatrists, from the psychologist. She even checked herself in to a behavioral health center.
Yeah, the McLean Hospital. She went for help.
Yeah. So it seems like she's doing everything right to try and take care of herself.
Now, in the morning of January 24th, this is the morning of the incident, Lindsay took Cora to a pediatrician appointment. And according to the Assistant District Attorney, Jennifer Sprague, there were apparently no issues with the defendant's demeanor or behavior. Lindsay would later randomly text Patrick and her mother photos of Cora and Dawson playing in the snow and building a snowman. So for all intents and purposes, they were having a really good day.
At 4:02 p.m., Lindsay searched Kids Miralax, which is a laxative, on her phone. She would call the area CVS and speak to the manager, who said they didn't have the product in stock but had similar medications. At 4:13 p.m., Lindsay searches Takeout 3V, a Plymouth restaurant, and then uses Apple Maps to see how long it would take to travel there from the Clancy home.
At 4:53 p.m., Lindsay texted her husband, Patrick, who was working in their basement office, or his basement office, I should say, rather. Now, any chance you want to do takeout from 3V? I didn't cook anything. It's been a long day. And then at 5:10 p.m., Lindsay calls the restaurant 3V to order a Mediterranean power bowl for herself and a scalloped pork and risotto for Patrick.
At 5:15 p.m., Lindsay texts Pedialyte liquid stool softener to Patrick. Then she sends him to pick up the food and the medicine. At 5:32 p.m., Patrick is seen on CCTV camera entering the CVS store that is a little more than 2 miles away from their home. He goes straight to the children's medication aisle.
And at 5:33 p.m., Patrick calls Lindsay, who doesn't pick up right away. Then she ends up calling him back a minute later to confirm the medication. Now, Patrick would tell police that the call seemed normal, but that she sounded like she was in the middle of something. So something was out of the ordinary that he kind of noticed. Now, 5:37 p.m., Patrick is seen on CCTV as he then leaves the CVS. And then at 5:54, Patrick is seen again on camera entering 3V. He picks up and pays for the order a minute later.
At 6:09 p.m., Patrick arrives home and his wife and children are nowhere to be found. His bedroom door is locked, but he forces it open and sees the window is open and blood on the floor. He looks outside to see his wife on the ground below.
2 minutes later, at 6:11 p.m., Patrick calls 911. And with the emergency dispatcher on the line, Patrick encountered his wife, who he now sees had cuts on her wrists and her neck. He asked her, "What did you do?" And she tells him she tried to take her own life. He then asked where the children were, and she told him they were in the basement.
Patrick was then heard screaming in agony and shock as he located his children face down on the floor with the exercise bands used to strangle them tied around their necks. He yells out, "She killed the kids." Patrick removed the bands, begged his children to breathe, and then started screaming uncontrollably. Inside the home, police followed the sound of Patrick's extremely loud screaming to the basement to find the 3 children there.
In listening to the police radio chatter, you can hear in the on-the-scene officer's voice how horrible that the situation is as he requested a second and then a third ambulance. He's like, "We need an ambulance here right away because they found the woman in the yard." That was the initial call.
Right.
They didn't know anything about the children, so when they arrive on scene, they can hear Patrick. They run down, and he says, "I need another ambulance. Please send a second ambulance." Then he says, "Correction, please send a third ambulance." And you can just tell when you listen that he's witnessing something that he really doesn't want to be involved in. I can almost assure you. At 7:28 p.m., both Cora and Dawson were pronounced dead at the Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital in Plymouth.
At Lindsay's arraignment, Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Sprague told the court that Lindsay created the situation and she used Apple Maps to make sure that she would have enough time to strangle each child. She planned these murders and gave herself the time and privacy to commit these murders. In the days leading up to the alleged killings, Sprague said Lindsay meticulously detailed her activities and never showed signs that she was hallucinating or delusional.
Yeah, apparently there's a journal that Lindsay kept where she wrote in there every day how she was doing, what she was doing, how she felt, medication. So like Lauren said, very, very, very well detailed. And this was taken as evidence from the home. Now, Reddington, in outlining the defense, asked the court to refrain from enacting the inhumane order of sending Lindsay to jail, arguing that she is in dire medical condition, a danger to herself, and suicidal. Now, Reddington said that the penal system in this country is less than par when it comes to the medical treatment for inmates, which I'm sure anyone that can think of what it would be like in prison, I think if you had a toothache, they probably wouldn't care right away. Yeah. If you had a bellyache, you were sore, and I think once you're there, you're just deemed a criminal, and sometimes maybe you're not getting the things that you need and the tools that you need to feel better.
Yep.
And in some cases, if you're Jeffrey Dahmer and things like that, nobody really cares. Now, according to her attorney, Lindsay is now paralyzed from the waist down, and it is said that she may not ever walk again. However, I recently read that she was able to slightly move a toe, so it's possible that she might not be fully paralyzed. Now, Reddington told the court that she was on a significant dosage of medication prior to the murders. As we mentioned earlier, she was prescribed and was taking several medications, including Prozac, Ativan, Benadryl, Seroquel, amitriptyline, and trazodone. Now, his client was thoroughly destroyed by these medications, Reddington said, and her mental condition has worsened since.
Okay, so we've driven that point home that Lindsay was grossly over-medicated.
Well, if you go back to a few episodes, the Ellen Greenberg case, we spoke about being over-medicated as well.
Well, Ellen Greenberg was taking several of the same medications that Lindsay Clancy is taking. So that popped in my head as I was researching this. And I believe she was taking Ativan or...
I know Klonopin,
Ativan. Don't
Seroquel,
quote me.
Yep, I believe Seroquel, Prozac, and there was a few others.
I think she was taking Ambien as well.
Yes.
That's Ellen Greenberg. These are two totally different cases.
But where both of which were, quote, suicides, attempted suicide. One, she obviously did commit suicide according to investigators, not according to Ken. And also in this case, she attempted suicide.
Right.
You know what? With all that, you guys can let that sink in. We're going to take a quick commercial break.
Okay, so what I think we really need to get into now is exactly what is postpartum depression and particularly postpartum psychosis. Now, according to the Cleveland Clinic, postpartum psychosis, or PPP, is a rare, treatable, but severe mental health condition that can affect individuals after they give birth. Symptoms can include hallucinations and delusions, as well as mood changes, depersonalization, and agitation. They'll have hallucinations where the baby's face isn't their baby anymore. Kylie Chafin, a licensed mental health counselor with perinatal mental health, told KXLY of the hallucination experience by some PPP patients. Someone with PPP will be like, "This isn't my baby. Someone has taken my baby," or the baby's face turns into the face of their mother or someone else they know. Women who have had a baby are expected in our society to love that baby immediately. Dr. Philip Resnick, the professor of psychiatry at Case Western Reserve University, explained to NBC Boston. If someone has postpartum depression or postpartum psychosis, they may not feel the natural maternal feelings. Then they feel guilty and are reluctant to even tell their husband or their obstetrician or pediatrician about their feelings. While those with a history of mental health conditions like bipolar syndrome or major depressive disorder are at an increased risk for PPP, the Cleveland Clinic also outlines other risk factors like sleep deprivation or hormonal changes. Unlike postpartum depression, which Postpartum Support International reports affects about 15% of women, postpartum psychosis is more rare and generally impacts about 0.1 to 0.2% of women who give birth.
So that's roughly, 2 in 1,000?
Yes.
So it's rare, but not that rare.
You're gonna give me math now? Okay. Postpartum Support International states that 4% of postpartum psychosis sufferers commit infanticide and 5% die by suicide. In nearly all cases that are true postpartum psychosis, there really is not malicious intent against the children. Postpartum psychosis experts and Postpartum Support International board director Michael Davidson told NBC Boston, "It's basically these women trying to save their babies or take their babies with them to heaven." Now, prior to this tragedy, Clancy had shared on social media about her struggles with anxiety in new motherhood. John DiPetro, an investigative radio host, tweeted on January 25th, "Friends of Lindsay Clancy told me tonight her husband was working from home instead of going into work to be able to try and support her daily while she went to a program 5 days a week for postpartum depression. And in the 25 minutes it took him to pick up takeout, the unthinkable happened." He also tweeted, "I was told Lindsay Clancy was in a very intense 5-day-a-week program for postpartum depression, trying to get help. Curious to hear a statement from the individuals treating her and what was missed. Sounds like she was in a desperate situation."
Yes, it does. She was obviously in a bad situation for the result to be what it is. Now, a mother taking the life of a child is unlike any other homicide, said George Parnham. This is the Houston attorney who represented Andrea Yates and visits her at the hospital every couple of months. Now, he's telling this to the Boston Globe. Now, George Parnham speaks to groups across the country about how severe postpartum depression and psychosis can turn a loving mother into an irrational killer. Parnham said Yates, now 58, believed she was doing the right thing by drowning her children in 2001 so they would go to heaven. A Texas jury convicted her of capital murder, but rejected the death penalty. Now, after that verdict was overturned, a second jury found Yates not guilty by reason of insanity. And Parnham described the trial as an uphill battle to convince jurors that she was insane at the time of the slayings. I gotta believe that's a tough, tough road.
Yes, I agree.
Now, after consistent treatment with antidepressants and antipsychotics, Yates realized that she had earlier psychotic beliefs and, of course, had terrible regret and severe depression over losing her children. Now, Parnham then went on to say that Andrea Yates' case laid a blueprint on motherhood and mental health of women.
On an Australian website called KidSpot, a mom named Tiffany shared her terrifying experience with postpartum psychosis. 3 months after giving birth in January of 2020, Tiffany said she struggled with postpartum depression and suicidal tendencies. It took her a long time to be diagnosed and over a year before finding the right treatment. She spoke of being woken in the night to a hallucination of a man standing in her room, saying her name and randomly counting to 7. "I saw a lot of spiders on the ceiling in my bedroom. I'd wake up and think, man, there's a lot of spiders moving around. I'd be up in my office in the middle of the day, and if I started hearing voices, I'd call my dog up to the room, and if he acted normal, I could tell they weren't real." The voices she's talking about. "I became really accepting of my hallucinations." So Tiffany started a blog, postpartumpsycho.com, and was amazed by how many people had experienced it. "It blew my mind how many people I knew, not even strangers, how many people I knew who messaged me and said what they went through. It's so normal," she says. "That's what's scary about it. No one is talking about it and no one prepares you. So when it happens to you, you have no one to turn to."
Well, regardless of the horrific act his wife committed, Patrick states he loves and forgives his wife. Now, this was made clear in a post that Patrick Clancy made on the family's GoFundMe page, which has raised over $1 million for the family with over 15,000 donations. Now, this happened just days after the tragedy.
Patrick wrote about his achingly painful loss and the deep love and forgiveness he feels for his wife, Lindsay. It reads, in part, "A lot of people have said they can't imagine, and they're right. There's absolutely nothing that can prepare you. The shock and pain is excruciating and relentless. I'm constantly reminded of them, and with the little sleep I get, I dream about them on repeat. Any parent knows it's impossible to understand how much you will love your kids until you have them. The same goes for understanding the devastation of losing them. Cora, Dawson, and Callan were the essence of my life, and I'm completely lost without them. I want to share some thoughts about Lindsay. She's recently been portrayed largely by people who have never met her and never knew who the real Lindsay was. Our marriage was wonderful and diametrically grew stronger as her condition rapidly worsened. I took as much pride in being her husband as I did in being a father and felt persistently lucky to have her in my life. I still remember the very moment I first laid eyes on her and can recall how overcome I was with the kind of love at first sight you only see in movies. It really didn't take long before I was certain I wanted to marry her. We said I love you to each other multiple times daily, as if it were a reflex. We habitually started every morning with a passionate hug, yielding a sigh of relief, like we had each received the perfect medicine. If too much time passed without a hug, she'd look at me and ask, "Did you forget?" We mutually understood the reality that people can have bad days, but we stuck to the rule that when one of us got lost, the other was always there to bring them home. Always. She loved being a nurse, but nothing matched her intense love for our kids and dedication to being a mother. It was all she ever wanted. Her passion taught me how to be a better father. I want to ask all of you that you find it deep within yourselves to forgive Lindsay as I have. The real Lindsay was generously loving and caring towards everyone. Me, our kids, family, friends, and her patients. The very fibers of her soul are loving. All I wish for her now is that she can somehow find peace.
Now, Rusty Yates, he's the former husband of Andrea Yates and the father of the 5 children that Andrea killed. Now, he's weighed in on this case. Speaking on Chris Como on the News Nation show, Yates recounted learning about Clancy's case and experiencing sadness that a tragedy of that kind would still happen 22 years after his kids' deaths brought widespread attention to the dangers of postpartum psychosis. He said that upon gaining a better understanding of what the illness entailed, he was able to eventually forgive his ex-wife. Andrea was a wonderful mother. When someone acts so out of character like that, it's a flag that something else is going on. As far as forgiveness goes, it's kind of the start. Yates said the next step of forgiveness, I'd say, is understanding it's a sickness. But for her sickness, she never, ever, ever would have harmed our children. He said the mental illness changed Andrea's personality and affected her sense of self and reality. Now, he likened the killings to a situation out of her control and was critical of the prosecution's tactics during his former wife's trial. If I were driving our Suburban down the street and had a heart attack and swerved into an oncoming traffic and everyone in the car died but me, would they prosecute me for capital murder and rub my face in crime scene photos of my children? I don't think so. But to me, it's 100% exactly the same. It's much like having a dream or a nightmare overlaid on reality so that a person sees things that aren't real, hears voices that aren't real, believes things to be true that aren't true, and then they act on that. It's every bit a part of the reality as everything else. They can't distinguish between those thoughts and images and voices and anything else, he added.
According to an article from Law and Crime written by Colin Kalmbacher on February 14th, accolades are rolling in for Lindsay Clancy. Letters written by those who knew Lindsay have been submitted to the court in her defense. The letters were not publicly available through the court at the time of this recording, but they were obtained by the Patriot Ledger and sent to Clancy's defense attorney. I do not know a better mother than Lindsay Clancy, Nurse Erica Severi, a former co-worker at Massachusetts General Hospital, wrote in a letter submitted to the Plymouth County District Court. She lived and breathed for her children. I am broken-hearted that this beautiful young woman, her loving husband, and their precious children have been destroyed because they were not provided with the essential medical care that they deserved. Please know that if our Lindsay had proper treatment, this family would still be together, another fellow nurse, Stacy Cabot, wrote. Please know that she deserves no further punishment, since they will suffer an unbearable grief for the rest of their lives. I could have been Lindsay, Nurse Susan Davidson wrote in another letter. Any one of us could have been. She and her husband worked so hard to get help and persevered through so much. How could prison be the answer for this family? They have already lost so much. Nearly 40 such letters were filed by Clancy's defense attorney, according to West Hartford, Connecticut-based NBC affiliate WVIT. In the wake of this tragedy, Massachusetts State Representative Jim O'Day, a former state social worker, intends to file a bill within weeks that would create a path for defendants who gave birth within a year before their crime and are diagnosed with perinatal psychiatric complications to be found not guilty by reason of mental illness. The bill, which applies to all criminal cases, also incorporates the definitions of postpartum psychosis and postpartum depression into state statute. I think probably as much as anything, it's controversial, O'Day, the House chair of the Ellen Story Commission on Postpartum Depression, told Mass Live. We take passing bills very seriously, and I'm hoping maybe with some language change and, frankly, a little more awareness today, regrettably as a result of what took place in Duxbury, that I certainly have had more interest around my being involved with the Postpartum Depression Commission in the last couple months than I have had in the last 10 years.
Well, Lauren, as we mentioned earlier, this case is fairly new. It's fresh. So there is so much more, I'm sure, that will come out at trial. I mean, there's going to be several twists and turns. And as we all know, it's going to get crazy. The prosecution is going to push. The defense is going to push back. I mean, it's just going to be a lot of information. So there's probably still more to come. So you guys can pretty much bet that Lauren and I will probably revisit this case at a later date as the trial starts to take off and conclude, if you will. But I would like to discuss a few things if I could.
Okay.
Do you want to? We're going to call it Ken's Corner.
Ken's Corner.
It's 2Ks.
Okay.
One question that I had, and and of course I didn't Google it, so I'm going to ask the listeners, and I'm going to ask you, what are your thoughts? Think about this for a minute. Your postpartum psychosis. Does postpartum psychosis stop once you've killed your children? So everyone's saying, you got to forgive her. She's going to be okay. She's going to be better. Does it stop?
Honestly, I have not heard anybody say that she's going to be better.
Well, what I'm saying is they're saying, please forgive her. She's got a long road ahead of her. And I understand it's going to be a long road. And I mean, I understand the mental illness that is behind all of this. I guess part of it's just, I'm thinking to myself, because there was one segment where her attorney was in court mentioning that she would like to get beyond this and possibly have another child. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. Does anyone here want Casey Anthony to have another child? No. Exactly. I mean, does anyone want Chris Watts to have another child?
Nope.
I mean, that guy was just psychotic, and I don't think it wasn't postpartum psychosis. He was just psychotic for whatever reason. He had the ability to kill his children, just like Lindsay had the ability to kill her children. Now, first and foremost, one thing that I would really like to mention is in every single article I've read, every research material, every piece of research material that I've found, there's at no point is Patrick painted in a bad light whatsoever. I mean, this guy is a godsend. He's like a saint. I mean, he did everything for his children. He loved his children. He spent time with them. He loved Lindsay and supported her through everything, her mental health. He went to bat for her, went to bat for the children. He moved his office that he was at. Basically, he was at work, and he got them to allow him to move his office into the basement so he could be there so Lindsay could take care of her mental issues that she was suffering. So, he again is a severe victim in this case. I mean, he's the living victim, if you will.
Yeah, he's the ultimate victim, right?
Exactly, because he's still living it. I mean, obviously, you've got Lindsay, who in one way, if we look at the psychosis situation, yeah, I guess she would be considered a victim. But Patrick, for the most part, his family, I mean, the aunts, the uncles, the nieces, the grandparents, the people that all love the children, those are all victims. But Patrick's sort of the ultimate victim because he has to live with the fact that that day he died. I mean, he died that day as his kids died, his family died, everything that he knew his world was, he died that day. But we don't know exactly what was going on. And one question that I have is I understand, and I couldn't find anything that said how long, this postpartum psychosis, because she said it was a moment. One of the things that she said when she spoke to Patrick on the phone, and he said, "Why did you do this?" And she said, remember I mentioned earlier about it was the first time that he had heard her say psychosis, postpartum psychosis, because they were battling postpartum depression, but after she spoke to her attorney, she mentioned the term postpartum psychosis. How long does that last? Because she said a moment of postpartum psychosis is what Patrick was quoted as saying. So it's not a moment. We're talking about several hours of time because she was able to look up. And this is where the prosecution is going to get tricky because that's where they're going with all of this, is everything seemed to be good. I mean, her journal was meticulous. She didn't show any signs of any problems. They're showing that her spellings in her text messages. And if you go onto YouTube, you can listen to Jennifer Sprague talk to the judge, and she says she spelled every single word correctly. She spoke, in word. I mean, she used finished sentence. It wasn't in text and nothing else. I mean, it wasn't shorthand, any of that kind of stuff. Everything was very clear in her text message, and she was Googling, how far away is this? In other words, she was trying to gap enough time to where she could potentially murder her children while he was gone. Now, I don't know if that's how psychosis works. I don't know enough about it. And I'm actually going to start looking more into it because I'm very interested in how that functions and how long it can last, because we're talking 2-3 hours of time that passed from the time she maybe started Googling this, checking this, doing these things and trying to figure it all out, and then the actual act happening. Now, obviously, a lot of that's going to come out at trial, which, of course, like I said, we'll probably revisit this at some point. But I guess it just pisses me off because it's like you find yourself in these situations to where this happens to a family, for the most part, that is just a beautiful family. And we're talking with 3 young children, and everything is fine. And then all of a sudden, everything just goes to hell in a handbasket really fast.
Yeah.
And I guess that's probably why I'm just frustrated. And here's another question that I want to pose. And we kind of talked about this a little bit sort of off mic. What if her suicide attempt had been successful? So what if she was able to cut her wrist or cut her throat, or she jumps out the window? Patrick shows up and his entire family's murdered while he's gone. What happens then? I mean, would they say it was postpartum depression? Would they say, "Oh my God, look, it was what do they call it, a murder-suicide"? Or would they be trying to find suspects in this home invasion where somebody murdered the mom and then the children?
Well, you could almost compare that with that question. You could almost look at the case of Jennifer and Sarah Hart. They were a same-sex couple married, and they had adopted these 6 children.
That's the one you mentioned earlier.
Yes, and then they drove off a cliff. They all died. There was never any question about who was responsible. It was Jennifer Hart who was driving the vehicle. The children were overdosed on Benadryl, hoping they were asleep. And even Sarah Hart, the wife, was overdosed on Benadryl. I don't think there was any question. That's the only case I can think of where the murder-suicide went through
without a whole lot of other avenues taken.
Right.
Well, that was kind of my thought was, what if somebody had rode a bike by on the street and somebody looked out the window and saw this guy ride by, and all of a sudden this occurs, and they say, "Oh, well, we saw this guy," and they find him down the road and they arrest this guy.
Well, I think any competent investigator or detective there would be fingerprints on the exercise bands that were used. Lindsay cut her wrists, cut her neck. there would be a knife with her fingerprints, I'm assuming, on it, and she jumped out the window. In the very beginning, maybe there would be questions, but I think that it would become apparent what exactly happened.
Well, that would ring true had we not just covered the Ellen Greenberg case where she stabbed herself in the back of the head 11 times. So competent? I don't know. Maybe.
Well, I don't think that that was the investigators. I think that was more of a political thing and a
cover-up,
and the pressure on the medical examiner, because the medical examiner did deem that a homicide until he was pressured into changing it to suicide.
You know, that there's some facts to that for sure. So, this one gets me because a strangulation of your own children where you have to face them for a 1 minute, 2 minute, very up close and personal.
It's horrifying.
It is. And to think that it's possible if they're both in the basement, if they're all in the basement, each had to witness it occur.
Well, that's just like when you think about Chris Watts.
Yeah.
Killing his children.
Yeah. But it seems like there's a lot more protection of her than there would be him. I mean, once they found out he killed his children, it was everyone hates this guy and they want him to rot in hell. But now these people a lot of people are coming to her saying, oh, well, it's a mental thing. Well, maybe he had a mental snap.
Chris Watts didn't just kill his children. He killed his pregnant wife and his children. And he didn't attempt to kill himself. And he went on TV pretending like he was the grieving. My family's missing.
I agree with you 100%. I'm not defending Chris Watts at all.
No, I'm just saying the difference.
By no means.
If you're comparing, it's like comparing apples to oranges there.
You're right. Chris Watts was a bad example, but I'm just trying to say.
You could compare Chris Watts to Susan Smith.
There you go. Okay. Yeah.
You could compare Lindsay Clancy to Andrea Yates.
Because she drowned in the bathtub. That's right.
So,
that's why they interviewed her husband at the time, because that they are so evenly matched. And I understand the mental case, and we've covered, the Ellen Greenberg case. We talk about medications, and I think it's very important that some people need to, start paying attention to medications, pay attention to your friends, family members. If you have someone that has had a child, if you start seeing their behavior change, document it. Like say, hey man, I spoke to you on this day. Look, I took these notes here, because you don't know that a week, 2 weeks, a month down the road, you talk to somebody and then later on something like this occurs, you can tell investigators or the family, hey, this is what happened. So, just take things into consideration, because obviously people on medication, the medication nowadays is nothing to play with at all.
I agree. And always, if you see something, say something. So if you or someone is considering suicide, please contact the National Suicide Hotline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255, or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. If you or someone may be a victim of child abuse, please contact the National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4A-CHILD. That's 1-800-422-4453, or contact the social services in the state that you live in.
Yeah, and I think we can kind of wrap this up. And again, we'll probably revisit this at some point as more details of this tragedy come out.
Again, if you'd like to support the show, please subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media.
And be sure to check out our website again for links to all of our social media, merch store, and much more.
And please make sure to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening on and rate and review. This really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
And as always, thank you all so much for listening
to Paradise After Dark.
Dark, 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 dark.